Welcome to woman who entered was tall, veiled and trembling, not from cold alone. She threw back the black lace to reveal a face pale as the drifts outside. Mr. Sherlock Holmes? Her voice cracked like thin ice. I am Miss Eleanor Frost of Frostmere Manor, Surrey. My uncle, Sir Reginald Frost, was found dead in the snow at dawn, throat cut, yet not a drop of blood upon the ground. The local constable calls it suicide. I call it murder. Chapter 1. The Frostbitten Visitor. Hello and welcome to Fireside Deductions, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. It was one of those December evenings in which London seems to retreat into itself, drawing the fog about its shoulders like a threadbare greatcoat. Snow had been falling since dawn, thick and deliberate, muffling the usual clamor of the city until even the cries of the costermongers sounded as though they came from the bottom of a well. The gas lamps along Baker Street glowed with a sullen amber, each haloed by a nimbus of swirling flakes, and the wheels of passing hansoms hissed rather than rattled upon the slushy thoroughfare. From our sitting-room window at 221B, I could see the street below transformed into a monochrome etching. Black iron railings, white pavements, and the occasional scarlet splash of a soldier's tunic as he hurried past with collar turned up and shoulders hunched. I had just settled into my armchair with the latest number of the British Medical Journal, a cup of Mrs. Hudson's excellent coffee steaming at my elbow, when the bell gave a peal so violent that it set the crystal decanters on the sideboard trembling. Sherlock Holmes, who had been standing at the window with his back to the room, violin tucked beneath his chin, did not startle. He merely lowered the instrument and listened, head cocked like a pointer scenting game. A second peal followed, longer and more frantic, and I heard the hurried patter of Mrs. Hudson's slippers upon the stair. The door opened to admit a gust of cold air and our landlady, cheeks flushed crimson from more than the warmth of her kitchen. Snowflakes clung to the fringe of her mob cap like errant sugar plums. "A lady to see Mr. Holmes," she announced, breathless. "Says it's life or death, sir, and the snow is already to her ankles. I told her you were not receiving, but she would not be denied. She's left a perfect puddle in the hall, and her cloak is dripping something dreadful." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular light which I had come to recognize as the herald of a new problem. "Show her up, Mrs. Hudson, and pray bring fresh coffee. Our visitor will be half frozen." Mrs. Hudson bobbed a curtsy and vanished. Holmes laid the violin in its case with the reverence of a priest closing the tabernacle, then moved to the hearth and tossed a fresh scoop of coal onto the fire. The flames leapt up, painting the room in shifting gold and umber. I folded my journal and set it aside, curiosity already pricking at me like a nettle. The lady who entered a moment later seemed to bring the storm in with her. She was tall, taller than many men, and clad entirely in black, a heavy wool cloak crusted with snow, a veil of fine lace that trembled with each shuddering breath, and kid gloves so sodden they gleamed like sealskin. Snowflakes melted on the veil and ran in tiny rivulets down the lace, giving the impression that she wept crystals. She stood upon the threshold as though uncertain whether the warmth of the room might burn her, one gloved hand clutching a small portmanteau of Morocco leather. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice was low, musical, but cracked in the middle like thin ice beneath a skate. "And Dr. Watson, I presume? Pray forgive the intrusion at this hour." Holmes inclined his head. "You have the advantage of us, madam, but the hour is immaterial when a lady stands in peril of frostbite. Watson, a chair by the fire. Mrs. Hudson, coffee, if you please." I rose and drew forward the basket chair usually reserved for clients of distinction. The lady sank into it with a sigh that seemed wrung from the very marrow of her bones. Mrs. Hudson bustled in with a fresh pot and departed, closing the door with a soft click that somehow intensified the hush of the snowbound world outside. Holmes took his customary seat opposite our visitor, long legs crossed, fingertips pressed together in that attitude of attentive repose which I knew masked the most intense concentration. I resumed my place at the table, notebook open, pencil poised. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the street below, a horse whinnied and stamped. The lady lifted her veil. I confess I was unprepared for the face it revealed. Not above 30, with the kind of beauty that seems carved from alabaster. High cheekbones, a mouth made for sorrow, and eyes of a gray so pale they appeared almost silver in the firelight. Yet it was a beauty marred by exhaustion. Violet shadows lay beneath those eyes, and her lips were bloodless. "Permit me to introduce myself," she said, drawing a card from her reticule with fingers that trembled despite the heat. "Miss Eleanor Frost, of Frostmere Manor, near Godalming in Surrey. My uncle, Sir Reginald Frost, was found dead in the snow at dawn this morning. The local constable has pronounced it suicide. Her voice broke entirely, and for a moment she pressed the card to her lips as though to stifle a sob. "I believe it to be murder." Holmes took the card. She had offered it to him rather than to me, and turned it over between his fingers. It was heavy creamstock, the address embossed in severe black copperplate. Frostmere Manor, Godalming, Surrey. On the reverse, in the same hand, someone had scrawled in pencil, "Come at once, E.F." "Suicide," Holmes repeated softly as though tasting the word. "A singularly unconvincing verdict, I should say, when a gentleman of property chooses to cut his throat in a snowdrift at dawn. Pray continue, Miss Frost. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem." She drew a deep breath that fluttered the lace at her throat. Sir Reginald was 62, hale for his years, though troubled of late by debts. He rose early, always, claiming the cold sharpened his wits. This morning the gardener, old Jarvis, found him lying beneath the yew tree at the foot of the south lawn. His throat— She pressed a gloved hand to her own neck as though the memory were a physical wound. His throat was cut from ear to ear, yet there was no blood upon the snow, not a drop. Only the outline of his body, like an angel pressed into the drifts. The constable says he must have walked there himself, fallen and bled internally. But Uncle Reginald was not a man to wander coatless in a blizzard. And the wound? Dr. Watson, you are a medical man. Could a man sever his own carotid and jugular and walk 10 yards without spilling a thimbleful? I set down my pencil. "Physiologically impossible," I said firmly. "The pressure in those vessels would produce an arterial spurt sufficient to stain the snow for yards around, unless the wound was inflicted post-mortem." "Precisely," Holmes interrupted, leaning forward. "And post-mortem wounds do not gush. Tell me, Miss Frost, the precise disposition of the body." She closed her eyes as though to better summon the image. He lay on his back, arms outstretched, one knee bent. His dressing gown, silk, midnight blue, was open to the waist, the collar turned up as though against the cold. No weapon was found. The snow about him was smooth, save for a single set of footprints leading from the library's French windows to the spot where he lay. Those prints were deep at the heel, shallow at the toe, as though— She opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. "As though he were carried," Holmes's fingers drummed once upon his knee. "Carried, yes. And the library windows, locked from within?" "Bolted. The key was on the inside of the door. The room itself showed no sign of struggle. Only Uncle's chair drawn up to the fire, a decanter of port half empty, and his pipe still warm in the grate." "Warm," Holmes echoed. "At what hour was the body discovered?" 6 o'clock. The household rises early. The maids light the fires at 5:30. Jarvis saw the shape in the snow from the kitchen window and raised the alarm." Holmes rose and paced to the window, parting the curtains with one finger. Snow still fell in thick, lazy spirals. A man dies in a locked room, is carried through snow without disturbing the drifts save for one set of prints, and bleeds not at all. Curious. And the household? Compose it for me, if you please. Miss Frost counted upon her fingers, the glove creasing like black tissue. My aunt, Lady Beatrice Frost. Sir Reginald's elder sister, a widow these 20 years. Captain Harold Blaine, my cousin, late of the 66th Bengal Infantry. Invalided home from Afghanistan with a limp and a taste for laudanum. Mr. Percival Wren, the family solicitor who has been staying at the manor this fortnight past to revise Uncle's will. And the servants, Mrs. Jarvis, the housekeeper, Greta, the parlor maid. Swedish, I believe, and old Jarvis himself who tends the gardens and the horses. That is all. Holmes turned from the window, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. And your own position in this tableau, Miss Frost? I am Sir Reginald's niece by his younger brother who died in India when I was a child. Uncle took me in. I keep house for him. Or did. Her voice wavered again. The estate is entailed upon the male line, but Uncle promised me a competence. If the suicide verdict stands, the insurance will not pay and I shall be penniless. Holmes waved the financial aspect aside as though it were cigar smoke. The footprints, were they measured? Constable Lestrade, cousin to your Scotland Yard friend, I believe, pronounced them Sir Reginald's own. Size 10, hobnailed slippers. But Uncle's slippers were found beside his bed, dry and untouched. For the first time Holmes smiled, a thin, wolfish expression. Then we have our first lie. Watson the Bradshaw. There is a train to Godalming at 7:30. Miss Frost, you will remain here tonight. Mrs. Hudson will find you a room. Tomorrow we shall examine this bloodless corpse and these impossible footprints. But first... He crossed to the mantel and took down a small morocco case. From it he produced a hypodermic syringe gleaming in the firelight. Miss Frost recoiled. You are an opium eater? Only of facts, madam, Holmes replied, returning the syringe unused. A 7% solution of curiosity. Watson, pack your revolver. I have a presentiment that Frostmere Manor conceals more than one frozen secret. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft as a murderer's footstep. Chapter 2. Footprints in the Snow. The 7:30 from Waterloo was a snorting iron beast, its windows already rimed with frost before we had cleared the suburbs. Miss Eleanor Frost sat opposite us in a first-class compartment, her black cloak folded neatly despite the jolting of the carriage. Holmes had refused to let her return alone. He had wired Lestrade the younger at Godalming with cryptic brevity, and now he sat with chin upon breast, eyes half closed, the perfect image of a man asleep, save for the restless tapping of his right forefinger upon the window-sill. I occupied myself with the morning papers. The Surrey Advertiser carried a paragraph on page 3. The baronet was discovered at dawn yesterday in the grounds of Frostmere Manor, his throat cut. Foul play is not suspected. An inquest will be held. Holmes snorted when I read it aloud. Foul play is not suspected because the local constabulary has the imagination of a sweet pudding. Watson, observe the telegraph. Wires. He gestured with his pipe stem. They sag beneath the weight of snow. Communication will be cut by noon. Our murderer counts upon isolation. The train lurched into Godalming station at 9:15. A closed brougham awaited us, its coachman muffled to the eyes in scarves. The road to Frostmere wound upward through pine woods, the horses laboring through drifts already axle-deep. Snow sifted from the branches in soft avalanches, and the world narrowed to a tunnel of white and black. Frostmere Manor appeared suddenly at a bend, a sprawling Elizabethan pile of mullioned windows and twisted chimneys, half smothered in ivy, now stiff with rime. The south lawn sloped away before it like a counterpane, marred by a single dark scar, the site of the discovery. A knot of villagers lingered at the gates, breath pluming, but a constable shooed them back as our carriage swept through. Old Jarvis the gardener met us in the stable yard, his face the color and texture of walnut. He touched his forelock to Miss Frost, then eyed Holmes with the suspicion country folk reserve for Londoners. "Body's in the ice house, sir. Doctor's seen it. Inquest tomorrow." Holmes leapt down before the wheels had stopped. "Excellent. Lead on, my man. Watson, bring your lens." The ice house lay beyond the kitchen gardens, a low brick dome half buried in a drift. Inside, the temperature dropped like a stone. Sir Reginald Frost lay upon a bed of sawdust, a Union flag draped to his chin. The cold had preserved him perfectly. His skin was waxen, the wound in his throat a clean crimson line from ear to ear. No blood stained the flag, no pool beneath the bier. I bent to examine the incision. Single stroke, right-handed downward slant. Razor or scalpel. Carotid and jugular severed cleanly, yet I lifted the flag. The dressing gown was pristine, the sawdust beneath unstained. Impossible. Holmes was already on his knees in the snow outside the ice house door. "Observe the footprints, Watson. From the library French windows, distance precisely 37 yards. Depth at heel 2.5 inches, at toe 3/4. The weight is borne forward. A man walking would press deeper with the toe. These prints were made by a burden carried." He produced a tape and measured stride. 5 feet 4 inches between impressions. The carrier was tall, 6 foot or more, and walked heel first to distribute weight. See the slight drag here. He brushed snow from a print. A bootlace trailing. Our man was in haste. Miss Frost had followed us, her breath hung in pale clouds. The library windows were bolted on the inside. I saw them myself. Holmes straightened, eyes glittering like the ice about us. Then the body was removed after the bolts were shot. The killer had an accomplice within, or a most ingenious mechanism. Come. We followed the prints across the lawn. They ended abruptly at the yew tree where the snow was trampled into a rough oval, the angel Miss Frost had described. Holmes lay flat and pressed his face to the depression. 2 distinct layers. The body lay here first, see the sharper outline, then was lifted and carried to the ice house later. The second set of prints was brushed out with a besom. Flakes of yew bark betray the broom. A shout from the manor. Captain Harold Blaine limped across the terrace, leaning on a malacca cane. He was younger than I expected, barely 30, with the sun-browned skin of the frontier and eyes the color of winter water. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, livid against the cold. "Eleanor!" "What the devil?" His gaze flicked to Holmes, narrowed. "And you are?" "Sherlock Holmes, this is Dr. Watson. We are here at your cousin's invitation." Blaine's knuckles whitened on the cane. "The inquest is tomorrow. There's nothing for you here but a suicide." Holmes smiled thinly. "Suicides rarely carry themselves 37 yards through snow, Captain. Tell me, were you in the library last night?" "I was abed by 10. Laudanum for the leg." He tapped the cane against his thigh. The sound was hollow. "Ask the servants." "Oh, I shall," Holmes murmured. "Everyone." Inside, the library was exactly as Miss Frost had described. Oak paneling, turkey carpet, fire burnt to ash. The French windows opened onto the lawn. The bolts were massive iron, the key still in the lock. Holmes examined them minutely. Scratches. Fresh. The bolts were shot from outside, then the key turned with pliers or a similar tool. The killer left by the window, locked it behind him, and tossed the pliers into the snow. "We shall find them when the thaw comes." He crossed to the hearth. A single pipe lay in the grate, bowl cracked from heat. Holmes lifted it with tweezers. Applewood tobacco. Expensive. Sir Reginald smoked a clay, I wager. This belongs to another. From the corridor came the soft pad of footsteps. Greta, the parlor maid, appeared, tray trembling in her hands. She was slight, blonde, with the flattened vowels of Whitechapel rather than Stockholm. Her eyes darted to the pipe, then away. "Coffee, miss?" she asked Miss Frost. Her accent slipped on the S. Holmes took the tray. "Thank you, Greta. Tell me, did you light the library fire this morning?" "Mrs. Jarvis did, sir. I only brought the post." "And at what hour did you last see Sir Reginald alive?" She hesitated. 9 o'clock, sir. He was at his desk, writing. Holmes lifted the blotter. Beneath it lay a single sheet. Heavy cream paper, the Frostmere crest. A few lines in a spidery hand. "If I am found dead, seek the truth in the ice house. The blood is the key." R.F. Greta gasped. Miss Frost swayed. I caught her arm. Holmes folded the note into his pocketbook. "Curious. A suicide who predicts murder. Captain Blaine," he called suddenly. The captain appeared in the doorway, face pale. "What now?" "Your uncle's pipe, Applewood. You smoke a briar, I see. Whose, then, is this?" Blaine's scar twitched. "I've no idea." Chapter 3. The Silent Manor. The storm struck at noon with the suddenness of a theater curtain. One moment the sky was a dull pewter, the next the world vanished in a white maelstrom. Snow hissed against the mullioned windows of Frostmere Manor like 1,000 angry cats, and the wind found every chink in the Elizabethan masonry to whistle through. Inside, the house seemed to draw breath and hold it. We had retreated to the great hall after the discovery beneath the yew. The hall was a cavern of oak and shadow, a minstrel's gallery, suits of armor green with verdigris, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. A single chandelier of Waterford crystal flickered overhead, its candles guttering in the draught. The household had gathered as though summoned by some unspoken signal. Lady Beatrice Frost presided from a high-backed chair carved with the family crest, 3 frostbitten roses on a field of ermine. She was a tall woman, angular as a heron, with iron-gray hair coiled beneath a lace cap. A lorgnette dangled from a black ribbon at her throat. She raised it now and then to peer at us as though we were specimens under glass. Captain Blaine stood behind her, one hand on the chair back, the other gripping his cane. Mr. Percival Wren, the solicitor, hovered at a side table, sorting papers with the nervous energy of a ferret. The servants, Mrs. Jarvis, Greta, and old Jarvis, stood in a knot by the door, aprons white against the gloom. Holmes moved among them like a chess master surveying the board. He paused before the fireplace where a log the size of a hogshead blazed. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Sir Reginald in his prime, florid, jovial, a glass of port raised in salute. The painted eyes seemed to follow us. "Lady Beatrice," Holmes began, "you were the last to see your brother alive?" She lowered the lorgnette. "I brought him cocoa at 10 minutes to 11. He was in the library reading. I retired immediately after." "Reading what?" "Some tiresome treatise on drainage. Reginald was obsessed with the home farm." Holmes nodded. "And the clock in the library, does it keep good time?" "It is a Viennese piece, a gift from the Archduke Ferdinand. It gains 5 minutes a day. Reginald refused to have it regulated." Captain Blaine shifted. "Uncle was alive when I passed the library door at 11:15. I heard him humming, 'The Girl I Left Behind Me.'" Holmes's eyebrow arched. "A regimental tune. Curious choice for a man contemplating suicide." Mr. Wren cleared his throat. "Sir Reginald was in excellent spirits. We had just completed revisions to his will. He intended to sign it this morning." Miss Frost, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Uncle promised me a legacy. If the suicide verdict stand... Lady Beatrice's lorgnette snapped shut. The estate is entailed, girl. You will have your dowry, nothing more. Holmes ignored the interruption. Mr. Wren, may I see the document? The solicitor hesitated, then produced a folded parchment from his case. Holmes took it to the window, holding it to the gray light. The ink was fresh, the seal unbroken. Dated yesterday, he murmured. Witnessed by Greta and Mrs. Jarvis. Curious, Sir Reginald's signature wavers on the final letter. Arthritis, perhaps? His hand was always unsteady after port, Lady Beatrice said. Holmes returned the will. We shall examine the library, Watson, your arm. The library lay at the end of a corridor paneled in dark oak. The door was locked. Old Jarvis produced a key. Inside, the air was colder than the hall, the fire long dead. The French windows rattled in their frame. The Persian carpet bore a pale rectangle where a smaller rug had been removed. Holmes knelt, magnifying glass in hand. Fibers of wool undyed. The missing rug was carried out rolled. Blood would soak through to the underside. He sniffed the parquet. A faint metallic odor. Watson? I bent. Iron, blood certainly, but no stain. Absorbed and removed. The rug was the sponge. He moved to the desk. The blotter was askew. Beneath it lay a second sheet, crumpled. The blood is the key. Look to the ice house. RF. Identical to the note found earlier, but this one bore a blot, a thumbprint in crimson. Greta, who had followed us, gasped. That wasn't there this morning. Holmes held the paper to the light. The ink is fresh, less than 12 hours. Someone placed it after the body was discovered. Captain Blaine appeared in the doorway. What nonsense is this? Holmes folded the note. A message from beyond the grave, or a very living hand. Tell me, Captain, your regiment, the 66th, was stationed at Peshawar in '82. Blaine's scar twitched. What of it? I see Pashtun silver in your cufflink. A trophy? From a hill chief. What bearing? None, perhaps. Yet silver conducts heat poorly. Your left hand is colder than your right. You held something frozen recently. Blaine's eyes flicked to the window. I've been outside. Holmes smiled. Of course. We returned to the hall. The storm had worsened. Snow piled against the windows in drifts. The chandelier swayed, candles sputtering. Suddenly the front doors burst open. Constable Lestrade stumbled in, coat white, mustache iced. Roads blocked, telegraphs down, we're cut off till the thaw. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Excellent. The board is set. No one leaves Frostmere until the murderer is unmasked. Lady Beatrice rose. You exceed your authority, sir. Murder exceeds all authority, madam. Holmes turned to the servants. Mrs. Jarvis, the laundry. When was it last used? Yesterday morning, sir, for the housemaid's aprons. And the copper boiler. Is it still warm? Mrs. Jarvis hesitated. Greta lit it an hour ago, said the master's shirts needed bleaching. Holmes's voice cut like a scalpel. Greta, come here. The maid approached, eyes down. Holmes took her hand, small, calloused, the thumb stained faintly red. Ink? He asked softly. She snatched it back. Beetroot juice, sir, from the kitchen. Holmes released her. Of course. Watson, the footprints outside. Did you note the left boot? Worn at the outer edge, the carrier favored his right leg. Captain Blaine limps on the left. Blaine laughed, a brittle sound. I was abed. Yet your cane leaves a circular impression. There is one such mark beside the U, half obscured by snow. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. The chandelier gave a sudden lurch. A candle fell, hissing into the hearth. In the flickering light, the portrait of Sir Reginald seemed to smile. Holmes spoke into the hush. The rug, the blood, the notes, the footprints, all pieces of a puzzle. But one piece is missing. The weapon. A razor does not vanish. Watson, the ice house again. We braved the storm. The ice house door hung ajar. Snow had drifted inside. Sir Reginald's body lay as before, but the Union flag was displaced. Beneath it, clutched in the dead man's hand, was a straight razor, its blade spotless. Holmes lifted it. No blood, yet the wound was fresh when the constable arrived. The razor was placed after death. He examined the handle, engraved H.B. "Harold Blaine," he said softly. "Your razor, Captain?" Blaine had followed us. I lost it days ago." Holmes closed the blade. "Then it found its way to your uncle's throat. Curious." Back in the hall, the household waited like statues. Holmes stood beneath the portrait. "Sir Reginald was killed in the library at 10:07. Note the Viennese clock set 1 hour fast. The body was drained into the missing rug, carried to the yew, then to the ice house. The razor was planted to suggest suicide, but the notes—" He held up the crimson-thumbed sheet. "These were written in blood. Whose?" Greta began to cry. Lady Beatrice's lorgnette clattered to the floor. Chapter 4. The Crimson Stain. The laundry outbuilding crouched at the rear of the stable block, its brick walls blackened by decades of coal smoke. Snow had drifted against the door in a smooth ramp. When old Jarvis forced it open, a gust of steam rolled out, thick and fragrant with lye. Inside, the copper boiler, a squat iron monster, hissed like a dragon, its surface filmed with condensation. A single gas mantle hissed overhead, throwing a sickly yellow glow across the flagstones. Greta stood at the boiler, sleeves rolled to the elbow, arms plunged to the shoulder in crimson water. She froze when we entered, suds dripping from her wrists like gore. At her feet lay a sodden bundle. The missing Persian rug, once rose and ivory, now the color of fresh liver. Holmes stepped forward, boots crunching on soap flakes. "You have been busy, Greta." She tried to speak, but only a squeak emerged. The water in the copper was opaque, swirling with dark threads. I caught the metallic tang of blood beneath the carbolic. Holmes lifted a corner of the rug with his stick. It was heavy, waterlogged. When he let it fall, the splash sent red droplets spattering across the wall. "Enough blood for 3 men, Watson." Yet Sir Reginald's corpse was exsanguinated. Someone collected it, deliberately. Captain Blaine appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the blizzard. His face was chalk white, the scar livid. "What devilry is this?" Holmes did not look up. "The devilry of drainage, Captain. Your uncle was bled like a calf in the library, the rug the catchment. Then it was brought here, laundered, and the blood preserved. But why?" He dipped a finger into the copper and tasted it. Salt, to prevent coagulation. The killer intended to use the blood again. Greta found her voice. "I only followed orders. Mrs. Jarvis said the master spilled port—" Mrs. Jarvis, hovering behind Blaine, bristled. "I said no such thing." Holmes ignored them. He was examining the floor. A trail of wet prints led from the boiler to a wooden tub in the corner. Inside, half submerged in icy water, floated a dozen glass preserving jars, each filled with dark fluid, sealed with wax. Holmes lifted one. It was still warm. "Enough to paint a crime scene," he murmured, "or to stage a second death." Blaine lunged forward. "This is madness. Uncle cut his own throat." Holmes rounded on him. "With your razor planted hours later. Come, Captain. Your Pashtun cufflink, silver engraved with a tiger. I saw its twin in the library desk this morning. You were there after 10. Blaine's hand went to his wrist. The left cuff was empty. "I lost it. In the snow. Yet silver does not rust. It would gleam." Holmes produced the missing link from his pocket, dangling it like a hypnotist's watch. "Found beneath the yew. You dropped it while positioning the body." Greta began to sob, a high, broken sound. "He made me help. Said it was for the inheritance." Silence! Blaine's cane cracked against the boiler. The sound ricocheted like a gunshot. Steam billowed, momentarily hiding him. When it cleared, he was gone, only the door swinging in the wind. Holmes was already moving. Watson, the stable, he'll try the horses. We burst into the yard. The blizzard had redoubled. Visibility was 10 feet. The stable door stood ajar, a rectangle of lamplight spilling onto the snow. Inside, Blaine was throwing a saddle onto a bay gelding, his movements frantic. The horse shied, eyes rolling white. "Stop!" I leveled my revolver. "In the king's name!" Blaine spun, cane raised like a saber. For a moment I thought he would charge. Then Holmes stepped from the shadows, a horse blanket in his hands. He flung it. The heavy wool enveloped Blaine's head. I darted forward and pinned his arms. The cane clattered to the straw. Holmes bound him with bridle reins. "Captain Harold Blaine, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Frost." Blaine struggled, cursing in Pashto. "You'll never prove it. The will is forged," Holmes finished. "Mr. Wren's ink, but not Sir Reginald's hand. The tremor is artificial, laudanum on the nib. You dictated it while your uncle lay dead." We dragged Blaine back to the laundry. The household had gathered. Lady Beatrice rigid with fury, Miss Frost pale but composed, Mr. Wren wringing his hands. Greta knelt by the boiler, face in her apron. Holmes addressed them. The plan was elegant. Sir Reginald, ruined by gambling debts, agrees to a faked suicide. Insurance pays, estate passes to Blaine. But Sir Reginald refused at the last moment, threatened to expose the fraud. So Blaine cut his throat in the library, drained the blood to hide the true scene, and staged the Snow Angel. The notes in blood were to be discovered later. Proof of suicide driven by despair. Lady Beatrice's lorgnette trembled. "You accuse my nephew?" "I accuse the evidence, madam. The Viennese clock set forward to give Blaine an alibi. The razor, planted after the constable's first visit. The rug, laundered to remove evidence the blood saved to splash the library later, completing the illusion." Mr. Wren stammered, But the will, I witnessed it." Holmes produced the document. "Your thumbprint, Mr. Wren, in lemon juice between the lines, invisible until heated. The true bequest, to Miss Frost, unless foul play is proven. You forged it for a fee. Blaine promised you a share." Wren collapsed onto a laundry basket, face gray. Miss Frost stepped forward. "Then Uncle was murdered for my inheritance?" "For greed," Holmes corrected, "but greed leaves stains. Watson, the preserving jars." I lifted one. Beneath the blood, something glinted. A gold signet ring, the Frost crest. Holmes fished it out with tweezers. Sir Reginald's ring, removed post-mortem to fake a robbery, but the killer forgot the inscription inside. "To R.F. from E.F., 1863. Your childhood gift, Miss Frost. Blaine intended to melt it down." Greta looked up, eyes swollen. "He said if I helped, he'd take me away. I didn't know he'd kill again." Holmes's voice softened. "You lit the boiler to destroy evidence. But the blood was too much. You preserved it instead, hoping to bargain?" She nodded miserably. Lady Beatrice rose. "This is intolerable. I demand—" Holmes cut her off. "You stopped the clock, madam. Your cocoa cup, still warm at 11, places you in the library after 10. You heard the struggle, did nothing." Her lorgnette fell, shattering on the flags. Outside, the storm began to ease. Snowflakes drifted lazily now, like feathers after a pillow fight. Constable Lestrade arrived with reinforcements, his mustache thawed into damp curls. Blaine was led away, still protesting. The preserving jars were sealed as evidence. The rug was spread to dry. In the gaslight, faint roses reappeared like ghosts. Holmes stood in the doorway, pipe glowing. "The crimson stain washes out Watson. But guilt freezes solid." Chapter 5. The locked library night settled over Frostmere like a black velvet pall, the storm spent but the cold fiercer than ever. The manor's corridors were tunnels of darkness lit only by the occasional guttering candle in a wall sconce. Every footstep echoed, every door creaked like a coffin lid. Captain Blaine had been locked in the gunroom under Constable Lestrade's watchful eye, yet the house felt no safer. The blood in the preserving jars had been carried to the cellar for safekeeping, but its coppery scent lingered in the air, seeping through floorboards and keyholes. Holmes insisted we return to the library. The room was exactly as we had left it. French windows bolted, key on the inside, the Viennese clock frozen at 11:07. The fire had been relit by Mrs. Jarvis. Flames danced over the fresh logs, throwing long shadows that writhed across the oak paneling like living things. Miss Frost had been persuaded to retire. Lady Beatrice sat in a high-backed chair, lorgnette clenched in white knuckles, her face a mask of outrage. Mr. Wren hovered near the door, spectacles fogged with nervous breath. Greta had been sent to the kitchen under Mrs. Jarvis's stern eye. Holmes stood before the bolted windows, hands clasped behind his back. The classic locked room conundrum, Watson. A man dies inside, the door locked, the key within, the windows bolted from the inside. Yet the body is carried out and the room left pristine. How? I examined the bolts again. Heavy iron, no play. The key is old, turned stiffly, no sign of string or wire. Holmes produced his lens. Observed the lower bolt, a faint scratch, parallel to the keeper. Something thin was inserted between frame and bolt, levered it back. Then the key turned from outside with pliers. The scratches on the keyhole confirm it, but that explains exit, not entry. He moved to the fireplace. The chimney was wide, soot-blackened. Too narrow for a man, but a boy might manage. Jarvis has no sons. Lady Beatrice snorted. You'll accuse the chimney sweep next. Holmes ignored her. He was on all fours, nose inches from the Persian carpet. The rectangle where the blood rug lay perfectly aligned with the desk. Sir Reginald was seated when struck. The wound was from behind, downward. The killer stood here. He rose, positioning himself behind the desk chair, and drew the blade across. Death instantaneous, the rug caught the arterial spurt. I reconstructed the scene in my mind. But the chair, upholstered in Morocco leather, it should be soaked. Holmes lifted the cushion. The underside was dark, stiff with dried blood. Turned after death. The killer was meticulous. He crossed to the bookshelves, floor to ceiling, leather-bound volumes in serried ranks. His fingers ran along the spines. No secret passage, the walls are solid stone, yet... He paused at a section of law reports. One volume protruded a quarter-inch. He pulled it. Nothing. He pushed. A soft click. The entire bookcase swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a narrow passage. Lady Beatrice gasped. That was Reginald's private stair to the old priest's hole. He had it sealed years ago. Holmes stepped into the passage. It was barely shoulder-wide, the air damp and earthy. A spiral of stone steps descended into darkness. Sealed with plaster, perhaps, but plaster crumbles. He scraped the wall. Flakes fell like dandruff. Fresh disturbance. Someone reopened it recently. I followed, revolver drawn. The steps led down 20 feet to a low door. It opened into the wine cellar directly beneath the library. A second door, hidden behind racks of dusty bottles, gave onto the servants' corridor. Holmes's voice echoed. The killer entered through the cellar, ascended, struck from behind. Sir Reginald never saw his assassin. The body was wrapped in the rug, carried down the same stair out through the cellar to the yew tree. The bookcase was closed, the bolts shot from outside with the pliers. Found buried in the snow this afternoon, the key turned, pliers tossed after. The perfect locked room. We returned to the library. Lady Beatrice had risen, her lorgnette trembled. Reginald's own hiding place turned against him. Holmes closed the bookcase. It clicked shut seamlessly. The passage explains mechanics, but not motive. Captain Blaine's confession. Confession? Wren squeaked. Holmes produced a sheet of foolscap. Taken down by Lestrade an hour ago. Blaine admits the gambling debts, the forged will, the staging, but he swears he acted alone, and that Sir Reginald was alive when he left the library at 10:30. I frowned. Then who reopened the passage? Blaine's leg? Precisely. The limp is genuine. Shattered femur at Maywand. He could not navigate those stairs with a body. An accomplice. Holmes turned to Lady Beatrice. You knew of the passage. Reginald showed me as children, but it was sealed. Yet you brought cocoa at 10:50. The clock was stopped at 11:07. You're doing? She drew herself up. I heard the clock strike 11. I retired. Holmes held up the clock's pendulum. Stopped with a hairpin. Yours, I believe. The enamel matches your brooch. He produced a bent pin from his waistcoat. Found in the mechanism. Her hand flew to her throat. The brooch was missing its pin. Mr. Wren stammered, Lady Beatrice wished to protect the family name. Suicide voids the insurance. Holmes cut him off. You both conspired. Blaine struck the blow. You provided access and alibi. The blood in the laundry. Your idea, madam, to stage a second scene if needed. Lady Beatrice's face crumpled. Reginald was bankrupt. The estate would be sold. Harold promised us all a share. A scream shattered the silence, high, terrified, from the corridor. We rushed out. Greta stumbled toward us, apron torn, face streaked with tears. He's gone. The captain, he's escaped. The gunroom door hung open. Lestrade lay bound and gagged with his own handcuffs. Blaine's footprints, deep, dragging, led to the cellar stair. Holmes knelt. The passage again. He's fled below. We descended. The wine cellar was chaos, bottles smashed, racks overturned. A single candle guttered on the floor. Blaine's trail ended at the outer door, unbolted from within. Beyond the snow was a white wilderness under starlight. Footprints staggered toward the woods. Holmes sniffed the air. Laudanum. He's taken a horse from the stable. A shot cracked outside. Lestrade's constable fired into the dark. A horse's scream, then silence. We found Blaine 50 yards into the trees, slumped over the saddle. The horse had bolted. A low branch had caught him across the throat. His own razor, retrieved from evidence, lay in the snow, blade red for the first time. Holmes closed the staring eyes. Justice, Watson, swift and poetic. Back in the library, the fire had burned low. Lady Beatrice sat motionless, a broken doll. Mr. Wren wept silently. Miss Frost entered, cloak over her nightgown. Is it over? She whispered. Holmes placed the true will in her hands. Your uncle's last gift. The estate is yours. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, cleansing, covering the crimson trail forever. Chapter 6. The Alibi of the Clock. The library at Frostmere Manor had become a court of inquisition. A single argon lamp burned on the desk, its green shade throwing a pool of light over the Viennese clock, the blood-turned cushion, and the open secret door behind the bookcase. Outside, the night was iron-hard. The snow had ceased, leaving a crust that glittered like diamond dust under a frost-bitten moon. Every breath hung in the air as white vapor. Constable Lestrade, Jr., mustache bristling with indignation, stood guard over the cellar stair, revolver drawn. Captain Blaine's body had been carried to the billiard room. The razor, now truly crimson, lay sealed in an evidence jar beside him. Holmes moved like a restless cat, pipe unlit between his teeth. Miss Eleanor Frost sat in the morocco chair. The true will clutched to her breast as though it were a shield. Lady Beatrice occupied the window seat, lorgnette forgotten, staring at the moonlit lawn where the snow angel had been. Mr. Percival Wren had been given brandy. He nursed the glass with shaking hands, spectacles fogged. Mrs. Jarvis and old Jarvis stood by the hearth, the housekeeper's keys jangling at every tremor. Greta alone was absent, locked in the pantry under Mrs. Jarvis's stern eye. Holmes stopped before the mantel clock. Its hand still pointed to 11:07, the pendulum arrested by Lady Beatrice's hairpin. He lifted the glass dome, removed the pin with tweezers, and set the pendulum swinging. The clock gave a cough, then began to tick with the deliberate precision of a metronome. "Lady Beatrice," Holmes said softly, "you stated that you heard this clock strike 11, then retired. Yet the mechanism is a continental repeater, set 1 hour fast for Vienna time. The true hour when it struck was 10 o'clock. Your cocoa alibi collapses." Lady Beatrice's lips moved soundlessly. The lorgnette lay shattered on the carpet. One lens glinted like a fallen star. Holmes wound the minute hand forward. At the hour mark it chimed, once, twice, up to 13. The room echoed with the alien notes. 13 strokes, he continued. A European affectation. Sir Reginald kept it thus to remind him of a grand tour in '63. You, madam, knew this. You stopped the clock at 11:07 Vienna, 10:07 here, to place yourself in the corridor after the murder. Wren set down the brandy with a clink. But Blaine confessed. Blaine confessed to planning a fake suicide, Holmes corrected. He forged the will, staged the snow angel, planted the razor. But he swore Sir Reginald was alive when he left at 10:30. The throat was cut later, by another hand. I felt the chill deepen. The secret passage. Reopened by Blaine days ago, yes, but the killer used it after he departed. Someone who knew the house's veins. Holmes crossed to the desk and lifted the blotter. Beneath lay a third note, smaller, written in hurried pencil. The clock lies. The blood is warm. Look to the ice house before dawn. R.F. The handwriting matched the earlier blood notes, but the paper was fresh, torn from Wren's pocketbook. Holmes held it to the lamp. Penciled at 10:45, see the indentation from the nib. Sir Reginald was still alive, warning us. But how did the note reach the desk after death? He knelt, examining the chair. A thread of midnight blue silk, matching Sir Reginald's dressing gown, had caught on the caster. Holmes followed it to the secret door. The thread ran along the passage floor, down the spiral into the cellar. There it ended, snagged on a nail beside the outer door. Sir Reginald was dragged, still living, bleeding slowly. The carotid was nicked, not severed. He wrote the note in the cellar with a pencil stolen from Wren's case, left open on the desk. The killer missed it. Lady Beatrice rose, swaying. You accuse me? Holmes's eyes were steel. You brought cocoa at 10:50. Blaine had gone. You found your brother at the desk, discovered the true will. You lured him to the cellar with a promise of discussion, then struck from behind with Blaine's razor. The wound was shallow at first. He lived long enough to— Right, Wren whimpered. She asked me to stop the clock, said it would confuse the servants. Holmes produced the hairpin. Enamel from your brooch, madam, and your thumbprint, lemon juice again, on the false will's margin. You intended to heat it later, reveal the forgery, blame Blaine entirely. Lady Beatrice lunged for the secret door. Lestrade caught her arm. She fought like a tigress, nails raking his cheek, but the constable was younger, stronger. Mrs. Jarvis pinned her other arm. The keys fell clanging like a death knell. Miss Frost stood. Aunt, you murdered him for the estate? Lady Beatrice sagged. He was sending me to the dower house, penniless, after 50 years of managing his affairs. Holmes relit his pipe. The blood in the laundry, your refinement. You drained the body in the ice house, stored the blood to splash the library later, complete the suicide tableau. Blaine's plan, but your execution. The clock struck 1. True time. The sound was mournful, final. Greta was brought from the pantry, eyes red. Holmes questioned her gently. You saw Lady Beatrice in the cellar? She nodded, carrying the rug, blood dripping. She said if I spoke, she'd say I did it. Holmes turned to Lestrade. Charge her with murder. Wren as accessory. Blaine, well, the snow has judged him. Dawn was a pale line on the horizon when we stepped onto the terrace. The crust bore only our footprints, the angel, the U-hollow, the trail to the woods, all smoothed by the night's final fall. The ice house door stood open. Inside, the preserving jars gleamed like rubies in the half-light. Holmes filled his pipe with snow, tamped it, lit it. The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the clearing sky. The clock was the key, Watson. Time is always the key. Lady Beatrice thought to steal it. Instead, it betrayed her. Miss Frost joined us, the will safe in her reticule. The estate is mine. I shall sell it, use the money for a women's hospital in Godalming. Uncle would approve. Holmes bowed. A fitting memorial. The sun rose, blood red over the white fields. Somewhere a cock crowed. The manor's shadow shrank, revealing the clean lines of a new day. Chapter 7. The Missing Will. The morning after the arrest of Lady Beatrice, Frostmere Manor woke to a silence so complete it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Sunlight, thin and winter pale, slanted through the mullioned windows and lay in dusty bars across the turkey carpet. The police carriage had taken Lady Beatrice and Mr. Wren away at first light. Constable Lestrade remained, stamping warmth into his boots and nursing a split lip from the previous night's struggle. Captain Blaine's body lay in the ice house beside his uncle's, the razor between them like a silent accusation. The storm had passed, leaving a world scoured, clean, and glittering. Holmes had not slept. He stood in the library, coat collar turned up, pipe clenched unlit between his teeth. The secret bookcase gaped open like a wound. The spiral stair beyond was dusted with plaster from the broken seal. Miss Eleanor Frost entered, wrapped in a camel hair shawl, the true will still clutched in her hand. She looked 10 years older than the woman who had arrived at Baker Street 2 nights before. Mr. Holmes, she said quietly. The police have the forged will, but Uncle spoke of another document. Something hidden. He said if anything happened to him, I was to look where the frost blooms eternal. Holmes's eyes narrowed. His exact words? Verbatim. He was feverish the night before, laudanum for his gout. I thought it delirium. Holmes crossed to the fireplace. Above the mantel, the portrait of Sir Reginald glowered down, port glass raised in eternal toast. Holmes lifted the frame. It swung on concealed hinges, revealing a small wall safe. The combination lock was a simple 3-tumbler affair. Frost blooms eternal, he murmured. Ice, 0. He turned the dial. 000. A soft click. The door opened. Inside lay a single vellum envelope sealed with crimson wax impressed by the frost crest. Holmes slit it with his penknife. 2 sheets. One the revised will leaving the bulk of the estate to Miss Frost, dated the day of the murder. The second a letter in Sir Reginald's spidery hand. My dear Eleanor, if you read this, I am gone. Blaine and my sister plot against me. The passage behind the law reports is reopened. Trust no one. The blood will tell the tale. Burn this after reading. Your loving Uncle Holmes handed it to Miss Frost. Her eyes filled. He knew and tried to protect you. Holmes closed the safe. But the forged will? Where is it now? Lestrade entered, helmet under arm. In my saddlebag, sir. Sealed and witnessed. Holmes shook his head. There was a third will, the one Blaine and Lady Beatrice intended to produce at the inquest. It left everything to Blaine in the event of misadventure. Wren admitted forging it, but the document itself vanished from his briefcase last night. I remembered the chaos in the cellar, racks overturned, bottles smashed. During Blaine's escape, precisely. He took it to destroy the evidence. We must search the ice house. The ice house was a crypt of frost. Sir Reginald and Blaine lay side by side on sawdust, the Union flag now covering both. The preserving jars had been removed by Lestrade's men, but one shelf remained undisturbed, blocks of ice cut from the lake stacked like glass bricks. Holmes tapped them with his stick. One rang hollow. He drew his knife and chipped. Inside the block lay a rolled parchment, frozen stiff. He held it to the lantern. Through the ice, the forged will was visible. Blaine's name in bold strokes, Wren's trembling signature beneath. Hidden in plain sight, Holmes said. Blaine intended to retrieve it after his escape, substitute it for the true will. The ice would preserve it until the thaw. Miss Frost shivered. Then it's over. Holmes's smile was wintry. Almost. One thread remains. He led us back to the library. The Viennese clock ticked steadily now, corrected to Greenwich. Holmes stopped it at 10:07, the true time of the murder, and removed the back plate. Inside the mechanism, wedged between cog and spring, was a tiny glass vial, empty but stained faintly red. Blood, Holmes said. Sir Reginald's last message. He knew he was dying, dipped his finger, wrote on whatever paper he could reach. The vial was to be found later, proof of murder. He reassembled the clock. Greta saw Lady Beatrice carry the rug, but who saw Greta? We found the maid in the kitchen, kneading dough with mechanical fury. Flour dusted her hair like snow. Holmes held up the vial. You planted the blood notes, Greta. The first beneath the U, the second on the desk. Lady Beatrice ordered it. Greta's hand stilled. She said it would confuse the police, make them think Uncle wrote them himself. I used a feather quill dipped in the laundry blood. And the thumbprint? Mine. I thought it would look like his. Holmes's voice softened. You were in love with Blaine. She nodded, tears cutting channels through the flour on her cheeks. He promised to take me to London, a house in Chelsea. I believed him. Miss Frost stepped forward. You'll not hang, Greta. Accessory after the fact. Transportation, perhaps. I will speak for you. Greta fell to her knees, sobbing. Holmes turned away. The chain is complete. Sir Reginald discovered the forgery, confronted Blaine. Blaine nicked the throat to silence him, intended a slow bleed. Lady Beatrice finished the task, staged the scene. Wren provided the pen, Greta the notes, Blaine the razor and the escape. A conspiracy of greed undone by a clock and a frozen will. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The snow began to drip from the eaves. Slow, deliberate tears. The manor's shadows shrank to nothing. Chapter 8. The Second Death. The thaw came like a thief in the night. By noon the following day, the snow on the south lawn had sunk into itself, revealing the black earth beneath in ragged patches. Water dripped from the eaves in steady silver streams, and the yew tree stood stripped of its white mantle, needles dark and dripping. The ice-house door hung open. The preserving jars had been removed to the magistrate's cart, but the air still carried the faint, sweet reek of blood and sawdust. Constable Lestrade had wired for reinforcements. 2 burly sergeants from Guildford were expected by the afternoon train. Until then, the manor remained a prison of melting snow and brittle nerves. Holmes had spent the morning in the cellar cataloging the chaos of Blaine's escape. Broken bottles of 47 claret lay in ruby pools. The secret door to the priest's passage stood ajar, its hinges squealing in the damp. He emerged at luncheon with a shard of green glass in his waistcoat pocket and a grim set to his mouth. "Watson," he said, drawing me into the library, "the case is not closed. The forged will was the bait, the blood notes the misdirection, but the hook remains unset. Someone still profits if Miss Frost does not survive the inquest." Miss Frost, pale but composed, had taken up residence in the late baronet's study. She sat at the desk, sorting papers with the calm efficiency of a woman who has inherited both fortune and burden. "The estate is solvent," she announced when we entered. "Uncle paid his debts with a mortgage. Lady Beatrice knew nothing of it. The true will stands." Holmes's eyes flicked to the window. A rider was approaching along the drive, a postman on a lathered pony, satchel flapping. He dismounted, handed a telegram to Lestrade, and rode off without a word. Lestrade read it, face darkening. "From Scotland Yard, sir. The inquest is postponed. Snow on the line. We're to hold all parties until tomorrow." Holmes took the flimsy. The message was in code, his own cipher. He translated aloud. "Second will discovered in London Bank. Bearer en route. Guard EF." Miss Frost's hand flew to her throat. "Another will?" "Forged, no doubt," Holmes said. "Lady Beatrice's final card. She must have sent it before her arrest. The bearer will arrive tonight, under cover of the thaw." He turned to Lestrade. "Double the watch. No one enters or leaves." But the thaw had softened more than snow. At 3 o'clock, old Jarvis found the pantry window forced from outside. Greta was gone, her apron flung across the flour barrel, a single footprint in the slush leading toward the woods. Holmes knelt by the window, barefoot. She fled in terror, or was taken. We followed the prints. They staggered through the kitchen garden, past the laundry, and ended at the frozen fountain in the rose court. The ice had cracked. Beneath it lay Mr. Percival Wren, face down, throat slashed ear to ear. Blood had fanned across the ice in a perfect crimson star before freezing solid. In his rigid hand he clutched a sealed envelope, the second forged will. Holmes lifted the body with Lestrade's help. Wren's coat was soaked, his spectacles lay shattered beside him. The wound was identical to Sir Reginald's, single stroke, right-handed downward slant. "The same blade," I said. "Blaine's razor, but it was in evidence." Holmes examined the ice. Melted and refrozen. The murder was committed at dawn, the body placed here as the thaw began. The blood spread, then hardened. He pointed to the fountain's rim. Footprints, 2 sets. One booted, size 10, Jarvis. The other bare, small, Greta. Miss Frost arrived, shawl clutched tight. "Greta, did she?" Holmes shook his head. "She was the witness. The killer silenced Wren, then chased her. The bare prints run toward the ice house. We ran. The ice house door was ajar. Inside, the sawdust was disturbed. Greta lay sprawled beside the bier, a dagger in her back, kitchen steel still warm. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the rafters. Pinned to her apron with a hat pin was a note in lemon juice, the writing visible when held to the lantern. "The blood is in the ice house." The circle closes. R.F. Holmes's face was grim. The killer's signature forged again. "Sir Reginald's ghost walks tonight." He examined Greta's feet, cut and bleeding from the run. "She came willingly at first, thought to bargain with the bearer of the will. Wren was killed to silence him, Greta to tie the knot." Lestrade arrived, panting. "The dagger from the kitchen. Mrs. Jarvis says it went missing yesterday." Holmes stood. "The circle indeed. The killer is still within the manor. Someone who knew the lemon juice trick, the blood notes, the passage. Someone who profits if Miss Frost is discredited or dead." He led us back to the library. The Viennese clock ticked steadily. The secret door stood open. Holmes knelt by the desk, lifted the carpet's edge. Beneath lay a 4th note, fresh in Greta's hand. He is not dead. The captain lives. Help me. Holmes's eyes blazed. Blaine, the branch did not kill him, only stunned. He hid in the woods, returned with the thaw. The second death was his work, to destroy the final witness. We searched the house. The gunroom was empty, the ropes cut with the kitchen dagger. In the attic we found Blaine's coat, torn, bloodied, but the wound superficial. A trail of wet prints led to the priest's passage. Holmes drew his revolver. He's gone to the cellar, to the blood. The cellar was a shambles. The preserving jars were smashed. Blood pooled across the flags, already thawing into pink slush. Blaine stood in the center, razor in one hand, the second forged will in the other. His scar was a livid slash across his face. Laudanum glazed his eyes. "Too late, Holmes," he rasped. "The will burns. Miss Frost hangs for murder." He touched the paper to a candle. Flames licked upward. Holmes fired. The bullet shattered the candle. Wax and fire splattered. Blaine lunged, razor flashing. I tackled him. We rolled in the blood. The razor clattered away. Lestrade's handcuffs clicked shut. Blaine laughed, a broken sound. "The blood, my blood now. You'll never prove—" Holmes retrieved the smoldering will. The wax seal was intact, only the corner charred. "Enough remains. Your game is played, Captain." As the sergeants arrived, the sun broke through the clouds. The snow was gone from the lawn. Only the crimson star on the fountain remained, already fading. Holmes lit his pipe with the cellar candle. "The second death was the first truth, Watson. Greed kills twice, but justice thaws all." Chapter 9. The Snowbound Trap. The thaw turned traitor before dusk. A warm wind swept up from the channel, driving sheets of rain against the manor like thrown gravel. The snow on the north lawn slumped into gray slush. Gutters overflowed in brown torrents. Every window wept. Inside Frostmere, the air was thick with damp and the sour smell of wet wool. The police sergeants had secured Blaine in the gunroom again. Double irons barred windows, Lestrade himself on guard. Wren's body had been removed to the stables. Greta's lay in the servants' hall, a sheet drawn over her face. Miss Frost had locked herself in the study with the true will and a revolver. The house felt like a ship taking on water. Holmes stood at the library window, watching the rain lash the fountain where the crimson star had already washed away. His pipe had gone out. He did not notice. I had seen that look before on the eve of the Baskerville denouement when the hound's breath steamed in the fog. "Watson," he said without turning, "the board is nearly cleared, yet the king remains in check. Blaine is taken. Lady Beatrice and Wren in Guildford jail. Greta silenced. The forged wills are accounted for. But the lemon juice note pinned to Greta's apron, the circle closes, was written after Blaine was shackled. Someone else penned it. I felt the chill return despite the warm wind. An outside accomplice, or inside playing a deeper game. He spun on his heel. The blood in the icehouse jars. Why preserve it if not to stage a final tableau? Miss Frost accused. The estate seized by the crown for lack of heir. Who profits then? A knock. Mrs. Jarvis entered, apron sodden, face the color of tallow. "Sir, the ice house. The jars are gone, smashed, and the sawdust—" She held out a sodden mass. It was the Union flag that had covered Sir Reginald and Blaine, now stiff with fresh blood. Holmes took it. Still warm, the killer struck again within the hour. We ran. The ice house was a shambles, jars shattered, sawdust churned to red mud. Sir Reginald's body remained on the bier, but Blaine's was missing. A trail of blood and bare footprints, small like Greta's, led out the back door and into the laurel maze behind the kitchen garden. Holmes knelt. Blaine's shackles, cut with bolt cutters. The footprints are deliberate. Someone carried him. The blood is a lure. He followed the trail. The maze was a tangle of dripping evergreens, the path twisted like a serpent. Rain hissed on the leaves. The trail ended at the old ice well, a stone-lined pit 20 feet deep once used to store winter ice for summer. The cover had been dragged aside, a rope ladder dangled into darkness. Holmes lit his bullseye lantern. Down. The well was a cylinder of slime and echo. At the bottom, Blaine lay crumpled, throat freshly cut, the bolt cutters beside him. His eyes stared up at the circle of sky. Pinned to his coat with the same hat pin was another lemon juice note. The snow hides all. The circle is complete. Holmes's beam swept the walls. Fresh scratches climbed to a side tunnel, part of the old drainage system. The killer escaped this way, but why stage Blaine's death twice? A groan, Miss Frost's voice, faint from the tunnel. We scrambled after it. The passage was narrow, knee-deep in icy water. It opened into the manor's foundations beneath the great hall. There, bound to a pillar with picture cord, was Miss Frost. Her mouth was gagged with her own scarf. The revolver lay kicked into a corner. Beside her, unconscious but breathing, was old Jarvis, head bleeding from a blow. Holmes cut the cords. Miss Frost sagged into my arms. He wore Blaine's coat. Said if I came quietly, no one else would die. Who? Holmes demanded. Greta's brother, Jonek. He was the footman, dismissed last Michaelmas. He came back with the thaw, hid in the cellar. Lady Beatrice promised him a share. Holmes's eyes blazed. The bare footprints, his, not Greta's. He killed Wren, then Greta to silence her. Staged Blaine's escape to draw us away, then struck here. Jarvis stirred. Saw him in the maze. Thought it was the captain. He coshed me. Holmes retrieved the revolver. The final act. Miss Frost murdered. The note left to implicate Sir Reginald's ghost. The estate escheats to the crown. Janek collects from Lady Beatrice in prison. But the thaw betrayed him. The footprints melted too fast. We carried Miss Frost and Jarvis to the hall. Mrs. Jarvis brought brandy. Holmes reloaded the revolver and stationed Lestrade at the cellar door. Janek will try to flee through the drainage tunnel to the river. The water is rising. He'll be trapped. Rain hammered the roof like drums. At midnight, the electricity failed, lines downed by the storm. The hall plunged into darkness, lit only by the fire. We waited in a circle. Holmes, Lestrade, myself, Miss Frost with the revolver across her knees. The clock struck 1, true time. A scrape at the cellar door. Lestrade raised his lantern. The door creaked open. Janek stood there dripping, Blaine's coat hanging loose on his narrower frame. In one hand he held the kitchen dagger, in the other a sodden bundle, the last forged will. "Hands up!" Lestrade barked. Janek lunged. Miss Frost fired. The bullet shattered the dagger's blade. Holmes tackled him. They rolled across the flags. I pinned his arms. The will fell into the fire, curling black. Janek spat curses in gutter Swedish. "Beatrice promised," Holmes snapped on the irons. "Promises melt with the snow." Dawn broke gray and sodden. The river had risen, flooding the tunnel. Janek's escape was sealed. The bodies were laid in the chapel. Miss Frost stood on the terrace, the true will safe in her reticule, watching the rain wash the last snow from the lawn. Holmes lit his pipe with a spill from the fire. The trap was the thaw itself, Watson. Snow bound the crime. Water dissolved the lie. Chapter 10. The moor. Deduction. Beneath the ice. The rain had ceased by dawn, leaving the world washed and dripping. Frostmere Manor stood stripped of its white cloak, roof slates gleaming like fish scales, the south lawn a patchwork of mud and sodden grass. The fountain in the rose court gurgled, its crimson star long dissolved into pink rivulets that stained the gravel. Every gutter still dripped, a slow percussion counting out the end of winter's rain. The police wagon from Guildford waited in the drive, horses steaming in the cold. Yannick, wrists raw from irons, was loaded aboard beside the draped shapes of Blaine, Wren, and Greta. Lady Beatrice and Mr. Wren had gone ahead at first light, their faces gray as the sky. Holmes insisted on one final descent before we quit the manor. The ice house had become the heart of the mystery, and he would not leave it unexamined. Miss Eleanor Frost accompanied us, wrapped in a man's greatcoat, the true will sealed in oilskin inside her reticule. Constable Lestrade followed with a lantern. Old Jarvis limped behind, head bandaged but eyes bright with curiosity. Mrs. Jarvis remained in the kitchen brewing coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. The ice house was a charnel cave. Sawdust had turned to red slush. The beer stood empty save for Sir Reginald's silhouette pressed into the straw. Holmes moved like a bloodhound, lantern raised. The preserving jars were gone, but one shelf remained undisturbed. A row of ice blocks cut from the lake the previous winter, now half melted into glassy pillars. Holmes tapped the largest with his stick. It rang hollow. "Watson, your knife," I chipped away. Inside the block, suspended like an insect in amber, lay a small leather-bound ledger and a glass vial stoppered with wax. Holmes eased them free. The ledger was Sir Reginald's private account. The vial contained a single crimson drop, blood still liquid. Holmes opened the ledger beneath the lantern. Page after page of meticulous entries, debts, payments, then a final section in fresh ink. Miss Frost's breath caught. Uncle knew everything. Holmes uncorked the vial. The blood was warm, impossible after days of frost. He touched it to his tongue. Fresh. Drawn this morning. A scrape behind us. Lestrade spun, revolver raised. Old Jarvis stood in the doorway, a kitchen knife in his gnarled hand. His eyes were wild. "Had to finish it," he rasped. "For the mistress." He lunged at Miss Frost. Holmes parried with the lantern, glass shattered, oil flared. I tackled Jarvis. We crashed into the sawdust. The knife skittered away. Lestrade's irons clicked shut. Jarvis sagged. Lady Beatrice promised us the dower house. When Sir Reginald cut her out, she said, "Burn the ledger, kill the girl." I reopened the passage months ago. Yannick was my helper. Holmes retrieved the knife. "You cut Blaine's throat in the ice well, staged his escape. The fresh blood in the vial, your own, to keep the circle. Complete." Jarvis nodded, defeated. "Greta found me in the cellar. I silenced her. Thought the thaw would hide it all." Miss Frost knelt beside the old man. "You tended these gardens 50 years. Uncle trusted you." Jarvis wept. "Trust rusts, miss, like iron in rain." We emerged into daylight. The police wagon was ready. Holmes handed Lestrade the ledger and vial. "The circle closes indeed. Sir Reginald bled to write the truth. Jarvis bled to bury it. The snow hid nothing after all." Miss Frost faced the manor. "I shall sell it. The proceeds will found a sanatorium for consumptives. Uncle's dream. Frostmere will heal instead of harm." Holmes bowed. "A fitting resurrection." The train back to London was warm, the compartment empty save for us. Holmes filled his pipe with the last of the manor's applewood tobacco, taken from the cracked bowl in the library grate. "Observe, Watson," he said as the Surrey hills slid past. "How greed is like snow. It falls soft, covers all, but melts at the first touch of truth. Sir Reginald's blood was the ink, the ice house the press. The deduction was beneath the ice from the beginning." I closed my notebook. "And the moral?" He smiled, rare and genuine. "That even the whitest lie leaves a crimson stain, and that a warm heart, like Miss Frost's, can thaw the coldest scheme."